Hers is like an action movie level of somebody's neck getting snapped. Like, it's insane. Like, if you were doing Foley for Die Hard 7, you could use Janelle's neck snap sound.
Welcome to NOCLIP. I am not Chad Ruthermond. I am, in fact, Andy Kinnick, and today I'll be joined by special guests.
Not JJ Artemis. I'm Daniel Otten.
Not Chad or JJ. Janelle Vickers.
And just Stephen Otten.
And today we're going to be talking about Divinity Original Sin 2, which is developed by Larian Studios, published by Bandai Namco, and released in 2017, and then it kind of trickled out to other major platforms after that. So I just figured to start off with, like, this is kind of like a niche style of role-playing game, referred to as a CRPG, or computer role-playing game. And I grew up with like a shitty home computer, so I did not play a lot of computer games as a kid.
It had a very long life. We talked about this recently. You had like,
I'm pretty sure it's still there, right?
This big plastic.
No, we got rid of it.
Was it an HP?
Yeah.
Like anybody who grew up,
like a baseline model.
Anybody who grew up in like the late 90s and early 2000s would recognize this computer instantly, and you had it for like 15 years.
Yep. So yeah, did not play a lot of computer games until like 5 to 8 years ago because of that experience. So I don't have a lot of experience with these kinds of games, so this was all pretty new to me.
Well, Stephen and I have similar experiences because we grew up under the same roof. I mean, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of different things kind of count as like experience with this, because like if you play Dungeons and Dragons, I feel like you also have some familiarity with these games, because like the early ones were essentially just trying to be video game ports of Dungeons and Dragons. But we had Neverwinter Nights for the PC back in like 99 or whenever that was, and then like a pretty long drought before I would say I got back into this genre.
Would you count like as an action RPG, like our time, we played a lot of Diablo 2 in high school on our computer, so I feel like it's still an RPG. It's not in the same depth as these games, but it's a similar feel.
Yeah, I tend to put them in separate buckets. Like, I think like action RPGs are really have been defined a lot by Diablo, in such that they're kind of like a distinct genre at this point.
Yeah.
Where it's a more like arcade style, fast paced, focus on loot and combat. And the CRPGs, I mean, there is something we could talk about, like, but their history is super interesting because they were a pillar of video game development for a little while, and then I feel like people decided that they weren't worth making anymore, and they kind of morphed into something else. And then that's part of why I think Divinity is so interesting and was so successful, was like a return to form. So I think action RPGs are kind of separate. Janelle, do you want to talk about your history?
Oh, my history with computer games for the computer? You mean like Neopets Flash games and all of the Sims 1 through now 4? Yeah.
Divinity really draws a lot of influences from Neopets Flash game.
It does.
It kind of wears it on its sleeve.
I mean, have you ever participated in the Poogle races? It's intense. No, but as I feel like I've talked about on my rare appearances on the cast, I am kind of late to RPGs generally as a genre, and I tend to gravitate, I guess, more toward, console gaming, or my computer experience being, less of a RPG focus. So this was new for me.
But you are a huge Dragon Age fan.
I am.
And I think we can talk about this later as it makes sense, but I think Dragon Age, the development of Dragon Age is a great like mirror for the genre in general.
Right.
And so like you had that experience before coming to this.
The difference being that that is very much a solo experience, and you could play Divinity solo with NPC co-op, but this was much more of a multiplayer focus,
right?
Which I think was definitely a unique experience for our group, but what's a unique experience for me specifically?
Yeah, we should say we all played through the game start to finish together over the course of a year.
Yes, sure enough did.
Like all 150 hours together.
Yeah, I think it's important because the way you consume the game as part of a multiplayer experience is definitely going to be different than just going through it solo.
For sure. And I even played like the 25 to 30 hours of it solo back when I was in law school, and then tapered off, and then came back to it with you guys, and it was like a completely different experience. And I'll get into a little bit the differences, but
yeah. So one thing that you said was that this kind of game fell out of vogue. It was really popular in like the mid to late 90s, and I think part of the reason is that people didn't know how to like adapt this kind of formula with like the changing trends and all that. And I think one thing this game manages to do really successfully is modernize this style of game really well.
Mm-hmm.
And one way that they did it is, I think there's just tons of options. As we were saying, you can play through the whole thing with 4 people, and it's not just tacked on, it's like factored into the story and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, there's like, I mean, you guys didn't have the experience of playing it single player. I only had like a brief experience of playing it single player. But like this game accomplishes multiplayer in this setting in a way that I didn't really think would be possible, and that like I think is a super exciting development for this genre, because these games are way more fun to play with people. And it's not, I mean, so we played a little bit of Baldur's Gate not that long ago, and mostly through technical difficulties had to abandon it. So like Baldur's Gate is a great and foundational game, but the multiplayer on that, and granted, I mean, it's a much older game, so obviously the capabilities were way more limited. But like even now in the enhanced edition or the remastered edition that came out a year or two ago, you know, there's a party leader, and then everybody has to join the game, and basically the play experience is all of the people who joined are just like tagging along on the party leader's game. Like they aren't really acknowledged as existing in any meaningful way. And if the party leader dies, like it's a game over screen. If anyone else dies, it's not. And Divinity manages to incorporate all of the player characters as like totally equally important players, and even has inter-party dialogue, which is like just blew my mind when we discovered that. And it's used like just enough that it's one of the things I love most about this game is how immersive it is for all the players.
Yeah, and they even factor that in to like the creator characters, because it gives you the option of playing preset characters, which I'm a big fan of. I think that makes it easier to roleplay personally. But then you can also create your own characters, and you can give them these tags that the NPCs will react to in different ways. So like they've given the creator characters more importance in the world, which I think is really cool.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because I'm in the opposite camp. I very much prefer RPGs where you can sort of design your own character, because I want to get in that mindset of, okay, I want to create this character who maybe has this background and this experience, and how does their race play into the world around them, you know. So I prefer kind of creating my own experience in that way. But this is a game that very much benefits from playing from the pre-made characters, because they have built-in quest lines and experiences. But at least they did have aesthetic personalization. So even though we all chose pre-made characters, which initially I wasn't that pleased with, we were able to change aspects of their physical appearance that I think was a nice marriage between my desire to personalize the character with having this content for a character that was already preloaded into the world with a path.
Yeah, I come down like right in between Andrew and Janelle on that, because at first when I saw the pre-made character thing, I hated it as a concept. Like I wanted to create my own character. Even when Daniel told me about the game, he's like, "Oh, I think you should play. I think you told me you thought I should play Losa." And I was like, I don't know. I really didn't like the idea of having that laid out for me ahead of time. But I think throughout the game, it gives you enough choice on how to roleplay the character with the dialogue choices that you make while you're playing. You have some of the visual customization options are fine, but I think when from a role playing perspective, it matters a lot more, like how you can respond to in your conversations with NPCs and in your inter party dialogue. I think even if you play one of those pre-made characters, you still have a lot of choice in how you want to roleplay it. It can kind of inform what you're going to do a little bit, but I think as we played through the game, I ended up liking it a lot more than I thought I would when we started, because the initial idea of having preset characters I did not like at all, and then by the end, I felt like I had still made my character my own. So
yeah, I totally agree. I'm like, it takes a lot for me to get into an RPG. This is one reason like JRPGs have never been a genre that I've been able to get into, because they tend to not have character creation. So I am like all in on character creation usually. Like I really don't like having to play as a pre-made character, or like gender locked classes or like appearance locked classes usually are a turn off for me. But I think everything you said is right. Like the way that what the pre-made characters do is they provide another level of richness to the story experience, but you still, especially because you can completely customize their appearance, it more feels like it's a created character that just like has this extra backstory, and less like, oh, I'm playing like Geralt in The Witcher or something, right? Like a character that is like has a defined personality and like set of goals and stuff. So I like that a lot as well.
I don't want to step on your toes here, Daniel, but I do want to insert for the listeners that's a big plus coming from Daniel. I know how much he loves creating characters, because like making characters as kids in games was literally all he would do ever.
That's
like
true.
He mentioned Neverwinter Nights earlier, and I think Daniel created like 6,000 characters in Neverwinter Nights and never got out of the prologue.
No, it's
so
wild.
Like what's the other game? Skyrim. I'm sure I walked by his computer on like the character creation screen of Skyrim like 100 times. He was making a character and never actually played it.
And then
a
peek behind the veil is that this group is currently playing Neverwinter Nights, and you are on your third or fourth iteration?
No. Okay. I'm on my arguably second, technically third.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone's dragging me right now, but it is true.
I'm not dragging you, I'm just saying
well,
it's big for I think for Divinity that you of all people did not feel like penned in by the pre-created characters.
And I never wanted to change my character, which is like, I don't know what it is, one of my many like neuroses, but I do like, I love character creation and then like options for like customizing characters, but I also have this like addiction to making new ones. It is crazy to me how many times I played the tutorial for Neverwinter Nights, especially because now we're like, at the time I was like 7 or 8, and now we're playing through it, and the tutorial takes like 10 minutes, and I almost never got past the tutorial. So I put like probably 100+ hours into Neverwinter Nights of just like making a character, playing some or all of the tutorial, maybe a little bit beyond, and then making another one. And that has, I mean, it's not that extreme for me anymore, but like even in like World of Warcraft or like MMOs I play or whatever, like I tend to have a lot of characters. And I do think it speaks to the strength of the characterization in this game and the customization options that like I played as Fane. I thought Fane was really cool. I was able to turn him into whatever, like exactly what I wanted. And I never felt like, man, I really wish I could like re-roll as a different character or class. So I does speak well to the character system in this game that even I did not grow bored with it.
Well, maybe we should talk a little bit then about who we all chose and our feelings towards those characters. That seems like a good segue.
Yeah, I played Red Prince, good old RP.
The Pence.
The Pence.
Yeah.
The Fetch Pence of Blair.
Yes, the Fetch Pence of Blair in all his glory. But he's got to be one of my favorite like RPG characters that I've come across in a while. Like, I really because I kind of fall on the opposite end of the spectrum of you guys, where I tend to connect to a more defined character better, and I've always really valued that and think it can lead to like better quest design and stuff. But and I really found myself endeared to the Red Prince in a way that like it engaged me more than like making my own character would have.
What did you think of his like character specific story?
I enjoyed it. I almost kind of wish it would have gotten a little bit more, like, because some of it was kind of left on like a cliffhanger, like not knowing what the future of his race was going to be, or maybe we just kind of missed some of it. But
well, do you?
I really liked it.
Do you want to go into detail about what the Pince's arc?
I mean,
involved?
you were the only character that got laid, so.
Yeah, that was one of my notes for the podcast was Red Prince sex scene ?
That was a great, totally not uncomfortable moment for the rest of us.
I'm so mad.
Yeah, I narrated
honestly,
it for everybody.
that we didn't get to go through the portal to watch you make dragons with that other lizard lady. It was like, no.
Mhm.
The rest of your party has to stay here in the garden while you go to the Chase Lounge.
And just listen.
To make dragon babies. I was like, God, come on. If you're going to put the sex scene in the game, why are you limiting it just to the one guy? Let us in.
It wasn't really, if I remember correctly, there wasn't much of a scene. It was just kind of like the narrator guy was just like kind of was
So
like,
you
and
didn't-
Which
then
is a
they
profoundly
banged.
unsexual.
So we didn't get to see that.
Yeah.
That
It was
sweet
the
thing.
worst penthouse form ever.
We didn't get to see
Yeah,
the
there was
Pince's
like a-
scene.
No, there was no Prince Peen. The best kind. But no, there were some uncomfortable dialogue options about fondling breasts and things like
She's
that.
a lizard lady. She doesn't
But,
even have boobs.
Apparently she does. You got to use your imagination. But yeah. So it was fitting that I played the character that got the sex scene, I think.
That's true.
But I was just going to say, canonically, also, the Pince is the divine in our playthrough. Because you did make it to the well first before Dallas came
I
in
did,
and wrecked
yeah.
it all.
Yeah, so like, for context, Steven and I are the two people that, if you were a betting person, you probably would have pegged. Because part of the, like, most of the narrative of this game involves each character has a god that they are, like, a champion of, and that god wants them to, like, ascend and become divine. And only one person can be divine, so, like, it is an interesting tension in the story.
Well, because the divine is a conduit for the power of the gods.
Right.
One divine for 7 gods.
Right. And so the whole game, or at least, like, the first 2 acts, you were thinking, like, okay, at some point, I'm going to have to, like, turn on the rest of the party or, like, decide not to pursue this. It's one of the great successes, I think, in the narrative, because it genuinely calls into question, especially when you're playing multiplayer, like, what are you going to do when you are presented with that choice? And when we finally got to that
Or what
pinnacle,
we thought
or what we
was
thought
going
we
to
did,
be. Yeah.
Stephen and I, of course, were plotting and scheming. Stephen was scheming the most by far. And then,
Yeah.
through just, like, a random confluence of events, like, all of our characters became frozen except the Red Prince, who just, like, charged to the throne at the last second. And was, like, a genuinely, like an actual narrative twist that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I actually managed to make it to the throne and like hit the prompt to like sit on it.
Yeah.
And then it took a couple seconds and it was like, not
Yeah,
really.
and the game kind of pulls the rug out from you in a way that, like,
Yeah.
makes sense, because, like, it is a multiplayer game, and you don't want to, like, it to just turn into PvP
Right.
in the middle of Act 2. But
it was
Although it
a
at
fun
one
That's
little
true.
it was a fun little taste of what could have been.
yeah, it was great. It
To
was
have you two screaming and then me being like, go Pince, go Pince, go Pince, go, as he's like charging, tail swishing toward the throne. It's pretty good.
And I had done such a good job of scheming to put
You
myself
had.
in the best position. Like, I was gonna be on the throne. I was the divine. And then I got frozen for
it
no
was a
reason.
real like Snoke situation. You got you got cut
in half.
down right when you thought your moment of triumph was at hand. So I will just to, like, continue going around on the characters. Like I said, I played Fane, who is an undead eternal, which is basically like the Ancient Aliens master race. I thought risked having too many similarities with Red Prince because they're both kind of like erudite and like aristocratic and like snarky. But I did really like the way, like I liked his backstory a lot, and I liked the way that his story played into the narrative. I think it arguably was more successful in weaving it into the narrative than the Red Prince's story was, because like you find out at the end of the game that the demons you've been fighting from the Void Woken, are actually like all of Fane's race. Like they got turned into these monsters in the Void, and one of the choices you have towards the end of the game is to like bring back the Eternals. So like his internal conflict is manifested in the main narrative in a really interesting way. So I liked his story a lot.
Well, and there's also the issue of Dallas. So the character that you think is your main enemy throughout is revealed to be the only other still living Eternal.
And Fane's daughter. Which, to be honest, I didn't love as much.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think having a character be a surprise parent is not an especially interesting trope anymore. And it didn't really... I mean, I didn't hate it, but it just didn't really land with me in an interesting way. Mostly because Dallas is absent from the story for so much. She like set up as an interesting villain, but then is gone for like a lot of Act 2. Almost basically all of Act 2. And so when she shows up at the end, it wasn't as much of an impact, I think, as it was intended to be.
Right.
Yeah, I think if they wanted to make that a bigger impact, they would have put that reveal maybe at the fountain where at the end of, is that Act 2?
Yeah.
I think that would be a better place to then have Fane like wrestling with that going forward, because you get it right. You're in the final battle. Like all we were thinking about at that point is the end, like defeating Lucian, and like we're at the end of the story. And so it just didn't hit that hard right there.
Yeah. You want to talk about Sabille?
Sure. So I played as Sabille. I tend to like either archer, roguish type characters in RPGs, and I like, again, my Dragon Age is showing, when elves are seen as like lower class citizens in a fantasy genre, because again, with Tolkien being such a touchstone for fantasy, I like when those things are kind of subverted in a modern fantasy genre. So I was kind of drawn to Sabille for those reasons. I liked that she kind of had a chip on her shoulder, former slave. Anyone that wants to do a big murder as their overarching goal is kind of appealing to me. I like that she got to do her big murder. That was good. And it worked well. I would definitely say if you don't have other people that you're playing with in the game, I think Sabille is a really good pick. Because, as we mentioned, you get 3 NPCs if you're playing solo that you can add to your party at the beginning, and they're kind of like your adventuring team, and you can sort of moonlight as those characters in combat or for other points in the story. And I think Sabille was a really good addition to our team because she was able to do some setup stuff, some range attacks, and me as Sabille was great because I hoarded everything, and that gave us a lot of arrows at the end that
the other cool thing about elves in this game that breaks from like Tolkien lore is that they can like consume the memories of people who have died by eating their body parts, which I really liked. I mean, it played almost no role in the story, but just like added another layer of like you can eat someone's head and like get a cool little soundbite about their last memories. Like I thought that was a genuinely
there were some story moments that it either added to or quest lines.
I mean, you never needed to do it to like advance the plot.
Right. Well, but that's the other thing is that this story you could play with any combination of characters.
Yeah, you might not have an elf.
Right, and reach the end point, which I think is really interesting, and I think it also speaks to the replayability of the game. If you're someone that really, really resonates with the story, you could re-roll and play again with a whole different cast of characters. But I liked Sabille. I gravitate toward female characters, and particularly women who are either trying to reshape past mistakes or sort of change their narrative. So I liked her. I rolled her as an archer, but I think she could also have worked as a dual wielder. I don't know.
I played as Losa, and I traditionally also like to kind of fall into caster characters. I often will play a glass cannon of some kind or a magic user in any RPG. And I also kind of trend towards playing female characters in RPGs, at least computer RPGs. Mostly because I like to do something that's just different from myself and reality, I guess. If I'm going to play an RPG, it's nice to play some really different character, not just play some dude walking around with a sword and punching people.
Because that is your life.
Because that is me. That's my life. So yeah, I like to generally end up playing a female character and end up playing a caster, and so she was a natural fit for me. Losa's character is a musician, which is something I guess I used to be able to call myself.
Even though we didn't realize that until you stumbled across the loot and was like, why does Losa get this loot?
Yeah, she plays this like pretty great song.
It is great. Don't wait until the end of the game to play the song. If you play Losa, play it early and play it often. Because I had that loot in my inventory for like a year in IRL a year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that she had kind of two ways you could go with her character. Like I think with the Red Prince and with Fane, I don't know all of their like dialogue options. Probably because I wasn't paying as much attention when they were talking. But if they had really like strong choices where to go with their personalities, I felt like with Losa, you could either be, the sweet, innocent, want to save everybody, lawful good character, or you could go in completely the opposite direction, which I, surprised to no one, chose to go in the opposite direction. The big the big character trait and storyline of Losa is that she is possessed by a demon. So where the other characters have a god that is sort of channeling them and giving them power and asking things of them, Losa has the same thing, except it's called a demon, and it's evil, ostensibly, who is behind her and her power. And so another like look behind the veil that's super similar to a D&D character. One of the D&D characters that I play is a warlock in a very similar situation. So it was a real natural fit for me as a character, and it was really easy for me to role play because it's a character I'm really familiar with. But as far as playing is, where Janelle mentioned if you're going to play solo, playing as Sabia would be a cool choice. I think Losa is also a good choice to play solo because you have so much control with her different skills you learn. That's one nice thing they do in Divinity as far as learning spells, learning skills. You're not penned into, I'm going to put all my skill points into fire, and now I'm going to just use fire spells, like you are in some RPGs where you have to kind of, as you level up, select one school of magic to learn and be real good at. I really spread my skill points around, what we growing up would have called a buffet character. And where when we were growing up playing RPGs, a buffet character is the fool's choice and the children's choice that ends up being garbage in combat. Because of the way combat works in Divinity and playing multiplayer where everybody has all these different roles and things they can do, you can pretty much do whatever you want and make your character still be effective. You don't have to min-max to get through the game. So I could spread my points around into all the different elements and put a lot of points into polymorphing because there's just such a variety of skills to use. And so if I was going to play the game solo, I have a hard time picturing myself playing it as any character other than Losa because you can spread yourself around skill-wise and be able to manipulate battlefields and things, and then drop nukes on big groups of enemies if you need to. So there's just so much you can do as the magic user. I see her as a great lone wolf character if that's how you want to play the game. But she also, for the same reason, is, I think, an essential party member because of that glass cannon major hit if you need a big bomb dropped, or the ability to, teleport people around the battlefield, move enemies around, heal. So she's just a super flexible character, and I think she's maybe one of my favorite characters I've played in any RPG because of that flexibility.
Andy, you look like you're about to say something. I don't want to step on it.
I was just gonna say, as usual, the wizard is pretty essential in the party. I would definitely agree with that.
Well, we can get more in depth on the systems at a later point if we want to, but and I do want to. But correct me if I'm wrong, but none of the Lohse isn't locked into being a caster, right? I think you could play any of the characters as any role.
Yeah, you can respec into any class that you want.
I mean, it's interesting. I feel like it speaks to how strongly the characters develop throughout us playing it. That we think Lohse is a wizard for us,
right?
And Red Prince is a knight character, but technically you could play any of them in any role.
Really, the only things that are locked are race and gender. So, you could not...
You can't play Lohse as a man, yeah.
You could not play Lohse as a man. You couldn't play Sabille.
No red princess.
Right. You could not play Sabille as anything but an elf.
Right.
A female elf, specifically. But, I do kind of...
Yeah, it's crazy. I totally forgot that we even had the choice of not playing as the... as the classes
I mean, that
we
was
ended up
kind
playing
of,
as.
at least partially, the deciding factor in which characters we chose. Because we were like, oh yeah, you were like, I want to play the warlocky wizard type, and so you want Lohse. But in reality, we could have respect.
I feel like in a lot of games, and I'm just violating my own desire to segment the discussions into categories now because I'm going to talk about systems, but in a lot of games, I tend to bounce off of oh, there are no classes in this game. You can put your skills in whatever you want. Because that ends up creating something that doesn't feel very distinct for a lot of times, where your character can do everything. It's one thing that I think is kind of weak about the design of Skyrim at this point, or maybe just outdated, is that but at the end of the game, if you want, you are literally good at everything in Skyrim. And that's something I don't really like. I like to specialize. So it speaks, I think, to the strengths of the systems that you can technically do whatever you want. You have a lot of flexibility. You can't become good at everything. You do have to make decisions, but you can create a character, quote unquote, class that feels very distinct. Lohse really felt like a caster. The Red Prince felt like an up close melee fighter. They didn't just feel sort of amorphous player characters who can do a little bit of everything, which I think sometimes happens when games try to go for classless systems.
Yeah, I feel like it's factored into the design really well because there's a cost. You have to go to the ship and down to the hull to respec, and it's not like you can be good at everything at once. You have to make the decision and put in a little bit of effort to go changing things around.
Right.
So it's not like you can just open the menu and change whatever you want.
And you have to buy skill books, which is maybe the biggest barrier to entry. You do have to be thoughtful about, what do I want to learn? Because, I mean, unless, you can probably cheese the game in some ways and, do a lot more murders and get more skill books than you otherwise would. But, in general, the decision to purchase a skill is, a pretty significant one. Especially, the first half of the game.
Mm-hmm. And you got memory slots, too, so there's only so much you can learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I that's one reason I end up with a buttload of points in Polymorph, I think, is because it gave me extra slots. I needed so much memory to have all those spells in all those different categories. But yeah, I actually wanted to ask how everybody felt about the respec anytime option. That's another thing that I did not like at first. When I found out that was a choice you could make, I like the high stakes when you level up of you have to make a choice and live with that choice. If you are putting skill points in a certain place. But then late in the game, I did like that I could respec just with the way the game is designed with the different skills. If I really, you can't overload into one particular element. For me as the caster, if I load everything up into fire, and then we come up against a badass enemy who's immune to fire damage, it's well, this sucks. So the ability to respec and kind of switch up my skills throughout was useful. And I don't feel like I used it to cheese the game or cheat my way through. And I think when I found out you could respec, I was a little worried about it being really cheesy. So just if we wanted to all give an opinion on that, I think it worked out fine. But it was definitely something that gave me, I was a little worried about it as being a part of the game.
I think it's essential because this game is pretty hard. Like, this game has a healthy difficulty curve, and some encounters especially can be like pretty brutal if you don't plan well in advance and have the right skills and equipment. So I think that this game would probably be too punishing if you were locked into like character development choices. So I think you have to be able to respec.
Yeah, I agree with most of what's been said. I think it works well because it's designed around it. You know, it's part of the challenge of the game is that you're thrown into these different scenarios where you need to like experiment or change your strategy, and being able to respec into something to deal with it is like what they want you to do. And you don't have to do it so often that it's like a tedious thing. Like, it's well implemented in the game. Because I usually don't like that kind of stuff either and prefer not to use it. But it's usually not integrated as well into other games, I think. Is this one?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse. Y'all really kind of covered it, I think. And yeah, I mean, I think it also kind of led to interesting character role-playing choices for me, because Sabine was an archer, and I put a lot of points into doing really cool bow-related things, but also she had some polymorph abilities. And so I could be like, why does she have this polymorph ability? Is this an elf racial thing? Is this something that she decided to pick up along the way because she wanted to have more, like, trickster abilities? So I think there was a level of personalization there that if you wanted to read into it more in a way that I find very appealing, it could be kind of a pleasant way to customize the experience.
So I'm going to propose a shift in topic if nobody objects, because we talked about the like granular parts of the story and like with respect to the characters that we played. I was wondering if we wanted to talk a little bit about like the big picture narrative in the game. Like, was the story successful? What were like things that you liked and things that you didn't like? And I just sort of as a kickoff point, I loved this game. Like, it's not, I feel like that is probably obvious, but I sort of felt different ways about the story. Like, at times it was very successful. I think the first act is like probably my favorite part of the game. But it doesn't hold together completely successfully as a narrative. I think like the second act drags a little bit. I wasn't fully engaged in like the idea of the divine and like the stakes that were set up. And then by the end of Act 3, it kind of felt like, all right, this is a lot of ramp up to this final battle. Such that like from a narrative perspective, it lost me a little bit.
I feel kind of similarly. Like, the main plot didn't really grab me that much. But to me, that's not that huge of a deal. I tend to like the smaller moments anyway. And I think this game delivered a lot of cool scenarios and implications from little vignettes that you'd stumble across that I really enjoyed that, personally. And like, that's the stuff I remember. The main plot felt kind of like standard fantasy plot, which I don't really mind that much in an RPG, to kind of rest everything else on top of.
Yeah. But there were points in the main story, I think, especially in the latter half of Act 2 and in Act 3, where if you had like paused the game and asked each of us to explain what we were doing, like in the context of the main plot, we might have struggled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's why we have Janelle with us, is so she can tell us what's going on.
That's true.
That was Janelle's main role in the party.
Well, I mean, again, my my specific interests in RPGs are always like, ooh, character motivations. Why are the characters doing this and thing? What is the plot that's happening right now? Like, how do these small things and the interactions that we're having with these NPCs, like, tell us about the world and the state that everything is in and blah, 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 blah. So I think that it really does kind of depend on how you approach the genre or this type of game specifically and what you look for in your gaming experience as far as how much you get out of that. So I did like kind of the little bit quests that we went on, these sort of maybe fetch type quests or, you know, little one-off things for rounding out sort of the story and seeing how these larger issues, like how the resurgence of the Voidwoken and people's opinions on sorcerers and these kind of warring factions of authority in the game. I felt like that all kind of, when you step back and look at the narrative as a whole, helped to further the story. But of course there was a lot of lore, and if you're not necessarily a lore-minded person, that could be troubling. The high points for me were high, and that it had some of my favorite tropey things, like killing gods. In any book or game or narrative where you have to kill one or more gods, I'm in it. I love that shit. His Dark Materials? Yes. Murder God. Love that.
Every Final Fantasy game?
Yes. God is fallible, and sometimes you have to kill him. I like that. I also like, and I don't know if there's a term for this, if anyone knows it, or if anyone listening knows it, where at the beginning of a story, the character choices that you make, or the things that you do, sort of remove the other possibilities, but like, there are initially a lot of possibilities for who you want in your party, who you want to play as, but then after a certain point, so for us, we had the lone wolf guy.
Eban Medced, or
that
something
guy,
like that.
The dwarf.
Forget his name.
Forget his name. Again, but they're gone. They were in the narrative.
Yeah.
They were there, and then there's the colossal shipwreck. This is another, again, Dragon Age thing, where in Origins, every origin exists, but depending on who you decide to play as is who the game focuses on, and then all the other origins are wiped out. Same with Inquisition.
Right. Although this game is a lot more literal about that.
No,
like,
I mean, they all die in Origins.
Right, but in Divinity, you, like, stumble upon their source ghost.
Yes.
And they say, like,
Yeah.
I'm dead now.
Yeah, but I love that, too, where it also, I think, feeds into this idea of replayability, where you can see very viscerally, like, oh, these people in the context of the story also could have ascended to
Right.
Godwoken status.
And it is wild to think about the story without Fane or without Losa. Like, you can have that experience, which is, it does speak well of the way the narrative is constructed, and that they have enough interesting characters.
Right. I will say, though, I don't know if it's my inexperience with CRPGs generally, or if it's that I didn't play the first game. But I do remember being, like, kind of blindsided and overwhelmed our first session of being like, what is this turn-by-turn combat? What is Source? Why do they want to kill us? Why are we getting shipped to a prison? Where is this place? Rivellon, you say? I don't like it came to me eventually, but again, it was that sort of initial feeling of discomfort, and I can't really put my finger on necessarily whether it was a me thing or a game thing or a combination of both. But yeah, I think it was something that generally I was able to ease into, and I agree that I think that there were moments that it would be easy to get kind of lost in the sauce. But as someone who loves the sauce, I didn't mind it so much. Yeah,
I think it was, and maybe I'm just making excuses for myself, but I think it
no,
is a little bit harder
to...
I think it's a little bit harder to follow along when you're playing it with 3 other people, because they might be like in important dialogue and you were like messing with your inventory or something. You know, that's on you, I guess, but like it's gonna happen. You know, you're not paying attention to what someone else is doing, and you can miss stuff.
Yeah, I think again, not to beat a dead horse, like I agree with a lot of things everybody said. I think that part of our little our getting lost, like that Daniel brought up, is that the way we played the game was one time per week. We would get together and play for a couple hours. If you're playing this game solo and going through it, or playing with people or if you're in high school or in college and you don't have a job and neither do your friends, and you can get on and play like daily together. If you played through it in less than a year in real life, I feel like those issues of like, wait, what are we doing? Where are we? I think some of that came down to maybe it was 2 weeks in between game sessions for us because somebody had to travel to someplace for work and couldn't play 1 week. So like, or 2 weeks in a row. So we might have like, it might be, our sessions might be separated by weeks. And then the thing that started the quest we were on could have been in real life a month or more previous to that game session. So that could easily be kind of informing that getting lost along the way. But again, luckily we have Janelle who remembers everything to tell us why we were doing what we were doing.
I do have a Galaxy brain.
Yeah, and I really liked I like what the Janelle mentioned too, the like the side quests, even like the little fetch quests, the side quests. I'm not like a completionist when it comes to games normally. I don't worry about getting every detail right and finished, but throughout playing Divinity, as we were moving along, the entire time I was like anxious about missing something. And I think that says a lot about the world that they've created and the story, that you're not just like, oh, I just want to go and get to Alexander. I want to get to the end of the act. I want to level up. Like, I didn't want to miss talking to some NPC that we hadn't noticed that maybe had a quest that was going to be really important and have a cool story element to it. Because, like, there's so many little side quests and little side stories and people. Right now, I'm sitting here thinking about a paladin that we talked to who wanted us to find some owl or weird thing for him.
We never did.
We never did, and right now I'm like
you.
upset. That owl is haunting me right now that we didn't finish his quest.
Andrew, what do you think about that actually? Because I know you normally walk the critical path to completion without deviating too much. So what was your experience like?
I used to be a lot like that because I grew up with a lot of linear games, on like the PS2, like my formative years, But I'm definitely more in the camp of this style of design nowadays. And I think I was less concerned with that kind of stuff than you guys seem to be. Like, I was ready to move on to like Act 3, I think. And
we were like, fuck you, Andy, we have to help the
without
paladin.
like sweeping up everything. But like, no, I felt that pull too. I have it written down in like my notes. We took about like 150 hours to beat this, and not once did the quest design ever feel like it got repetitive, or like it didn't feel like there was any like copy paste going on. And like, the world is really dense, and it feels like, hey, it's like, oh, there's this path we missed, and like, oh, there's all this stuff down it. Like, it felt like the possibility space felt huge in this game. So now I definitely relate.
Do you guys have a view about like Messiah stories and whether you like them or not? Maybe you just feel lukewarm about them. I tend to not like them, sort of in general, in basically any kind of media. I guess Dune being the major exception. But like, especially in RPGs, it is such a tired trope at this point, and such a kind of lazy way of explaining why your character is doing important things, that I tend to not like it. And this game did have that, and was something that I didn't like about the main story. Although it subverted it a little bit, given that like everyone in the party could potentially become divine.
Right.
But I tend to prefer games where like your character is just like a normal person in the world and like gets caught up in important things and becomes an important person through their actions, rather than like at the start of the game you're told that you're the chosen one.
I think that maybe it was just from my character's perspective. I wasn't told I was the chosen one so much as I was told I was going to be used for like power games by some demonic influence. So the way I looked at the storyline wasn't that I was a messianic character so much as a normal person in an extraordinary circumstance that was had the opportunity to seize power and influence. And I think I role-played the character in that way, and I think the choices the game gives you, at least from my perspective, especially at the end game, when you can choose how the story ends, like, you aren't necessarily in it to save people or to save anyone. Like, my character's point of view was that I was being used for this power grab, but had the opportunity to seize it for myself. And so that is kind of like more of the regular person put into a crazy circumstance than to say, like, from your birth, you were going to be the great one that would take care of all the people. Like, I assume the Red Prince's story, basically. It's like you are. I don't know your story as much as my own, but that. So I guess I didn't feel so much of the Messiah complex or that story for my character. I don't know if it was stronger. I think it, as an outsider watching Fane kind of felt like, and maybe this is just our party, and the way we play games and interact with each other, but maybe it's Fane, maybe it was Daniel, but you felt like kind of the de facto leader of the group. And I think that's actually good for playing this game, to have somebody who is sort of your party leader, because every character is equal to a certain degree, and it helps to have somebody kind of guiding the ship. But maybe for Fane, it felt like you were a Messiah character. I don't think that Losa felt that way to me.
Sabine did not for me as well, but she had a much more tumultuous relationship with her god, in that he kind of looked at her as like, well, I don't like you, and I don't like that I have to do this, but you're my only option. And her being like, I don't fucking want any of this. I mean, I think you could probably roll it as a character who is like, yes, this is my divine right. I should be honored. But Seville was just like,
that sounds like Red Prince.
Yes, but for Seville, it was much more of a, you don't want me in this position. I don't want to be in this position. I just want to be like free from the fetters of my old life, and to, so with her it was much more of like a reluctant relationship that she had with divinity, which is, again, it is a really common trope, and that is typically how I roll with it. I don't necessarily like a character that feels shoehorned into like this chosen one role. But maybe that's just me liking fallibility and also murdering God.
I feel similarly to Dan. The Messiah character is a very like cliche narrative device or whatever. But I like in this game that like the competition aspect, that it almost makes it feel a little bit more like Hunger Gamesy or something like that. Like there's like a group of like exceptional chosen people that are kind of pitted against each other, but also they kind of have to work together. I find that really interesting, so that kind of saved it for me.
Yeah, that was very successful. I think I alluded to that before. I totally agree. I think that was the thing that made that part of the story interesting. And in the absence of, like, if it was just that, like, player one or, like, the host of the game was, like, slated to be the divine and everyone else was just, like, a party member, it would be so much less interesting than it was. Especially for our party, like, Steven's playing Losa, and it's baked into that like, it's Steven, so we're already worried that he's going to betray us if he can. But then he's playing the character who has, like, the most loreful reason to betray everyone. And so the whole time I'm just like, okay, we're going to get to, like, the end of this game, or as it turned out, like, the end of Act 2, and then Losa's just going to kill all of us.
Well,
like, that was, like, a legitimate, like, plot tension point.
Well, Daniel and I,
and at the end of our playthrough, it was funny that I was the only one who made a different choice than everybody else at the end, and I think it did come down to me to choose the end of the game. So.
Right,
it did, yeah, but it also led into it that playing remotely, Daniel and I shared a screen, and then you two had your own screens, so we did depend on each other to say, well, what did your god say to you in the wherever you end up talking in the divine realm. And so if Steven was like, oh yeah, it's a demon, he wants me to kill all you guys, we're like, but is that really what he said? Did he say more things? Did he give you a secret power? Like, we don't know. So I think that did add an element of, I don't know, like you're almost playing Clue or something.
Right.
Where you could open the envelope and Losa was the murderer all along, you know?
I actually am glad that you mentioned something there. I just want to express some gratitude, because I assume somebody from Larian Studios is listening. It is so great that this game included, like, split-screen co-op combined with online play. Like, that is so vanishingly rare in cooperative games or multiplayer games now. Like, that was just such a... This game had so many nice, like, quality of life things for multiplayer, and especially for a game that was kickstarted. Like,
we have to
this
talk
didn't.
about
This
the
did
fact
not
that it was
have.
Kickstarted.
I don't know like what this game's like development budget was, but it wasn't like a AAA like enormous budget video game.
Yeah, I'd call it like a double A.
Yeah, so like
game.
they had they had a fair amount of resources, but like this was not like the next Elder Scrolls game, and like there's
Right.
so much like craft and polish and like consideration of things, and the multiplayer was just something that I especially feel like really genuine appreciation for.
Yeah, RIP script split screen. We never say that anymore.
Do we want to take a break?
Sure, let's...
Or do we want to keep on trucking?
I'm going to do a quick
We wanna go to the money
SNR.
zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have to cut out that money zone thing, because then we're going to get sued.
All right, so yeah, I liked the train of thought we had going there, and I have some notes relating to it, but we'll talk about that more after the break.
After the break.
After the break. Is that a thing that we do? We all say after the break?
Yes, we usually try to do it in unison, but since we're not in the same room, I will accept the round that we had. Welcome back from the break. Before we left, it had been thrown out there that this game was partially funded on Kickstarter, and I figured that'd be a good place to jump back in, because Larian Studios had already been a pre-existing studio. It's not like an indie developer or anything. They did actually have a game in this series before Divinity Original Sin 1 that was called Divine Divinity, the redundant title there, from 2002, and the original Divinity Original Sin was a prequel to that, and Divinity Original Sin 2 takes place after it, which is kind of confusing, but that's what I found out from my my Googling this morning.
They also have like a traditional, like a more traditional RPG that is also in the Divinity franchise.
There were a couple of other like related games in there as well.
Yeah, like there's one. I think you play as a character that can like turn into a dragon. That was like the big. Maybe I'm mixing it up with another game, but there's a surprising number of entries in this franchise.
Yeah. I just think it's like a Cinderella story of fan relating to the creator, because the fact that they were like, hey, we would love some funds and some support ahead of time, and the Kickstarter response was just massive. And then for them to create a product that, based on all the reviews that I've seen and based on our experience, I think worked extremely well. I think that it was, a really great use of crowdsourcing. And it kind of speaks to people's desire for games like Divinity Original Sin 2.
Well, it was acclaimed in its time, obviously, but my sense is it's regarded as like now one of the best RPGs, just period. Which is like I don't know if you could imagine like a bigger success story for this game. Like it's borderline a masterpiece of the genre.
Yeah, I think the fact that Larian is doing Baldur's Gate 3 really speaks volumes to how great Divinity 2 was. Because
Right.
I don't think they'd be doing that if that wasn't the case.
No.
Yeah, with my limited experience, like playing a chunk of Baldur's Gate and a chunk of Neverwinter Nights, like this really does feel like it's kind of closed the book on this kind of design. Like it's hard to imagine how you could improve the CRPG much more than this.
I think we'll find out next year when
Yeah.
Baldur's Gate 3 comes out.
I mean,
Yeah, very, very excited.
I don't think I've ever been more excited for a game than I am for Baldur's Gate 3, and it's because, like, Larian is, like, the dream studio to do it. Like, it's almost unbelievable to me that we have the good fortune that they did get tapped to do it. Because, like, there's no one else you would want to do this. Like, it just makes so much sense that they're going to do Baldur's Gate 3. And it's because, like, this gets into something I mentioned at the very beginning, but Divinity feels very much like a sort of wonderful evolution of what is like a really old and traditional genre in a way that I think like basically nobody had done. So like we mentioned at the beginning, these games were really popular, like a mainstay of like computer gaming for a while and then kind of disappeared. And I've been playing Dragon Age Origins a lot lately, which I think exists at sort of an interesting crossroads because Origins was made at a time where, like, when you made RPGs, you still stuck fairly closely to, like, the Neverwinter Nights, Baldur's Gate kind of model. And obviously that game was innovative in its own ways, and is a really great game, but still adhered to, like, a lot of the traditional kind of design sensibilities. And then from there, like, the genre changed in ways that a lot of people weren't happy with. Like, 2 was much more of an action game and was a lot lighter on a lot of the systems and, like, traditional role-playing game elements. Inquisition, although which I also think is a great game, like, further streamlined things and made the combat more action-oriented. And the way that BioWare evolved in, like, the Mass Effect series and this genre in general is like it made a decision that worked out pretty well, given that like it made a lot of money and made a lot of very successful games, that like you had to go away from the traditional model, make something that is like easier to jump into, more user friendly, more streamlined, and like strip down a lot of the elements of like the traditional game. And what is so interesting about Divinity is it's like almost feels like a different evolution line of starting from the same place. It's like, what if companies just like kept making like the Neverwinter Nights and Baldur's Gate games and like kept just innovating on the original, like the core sensibility of those games instead of like going in a different direction, because it's very much like the evolved form of those games. Because there are like the Pathfinder games or some other, like, there are games that are made now that basically, to me, like when I play them, just feel like this is like a throwback to Baldur's Gate and doesn't really innovate on it in interesting ways. Whereas Divinity feels like the next step in like the evolution of those games. And obviously there like is a big appetite for them because this game was so successful.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned Dragon Age and other like AAA and Mass Effect. Like in AAA stuff like that feels like it has to follow those trends as games get more expensive to produce. They have to like, oh, like these open world things are popular, so make it like that. And D&D stuff is confusing to people, so get rid of that and just do like a simple skill tree thing that's in every game now. And yeah, this is for those people who liked that stuff,
right?
You know, like it's a throwback in its sensibilities, but it is like a modern like reimagining or retooling of that style that, yeah, like as you said, like I can't think of another example of it.
No, and like I don't even know what Baldur's Gate would look like. A Baldur's Gate 3 would look like in my mind if it wasn't for Divinity. Like it showed the way to do these games in like a modern way while retaining that original sensibility. Whereas like I would have just thought a Baldur's Gate 3 was going to be like a super niche game that like only like a small group of people would really be interested in playing. So like this kind of like showed that there's a whole like genre, I feel like, out there that people want to play, that had not been tapped into for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I still really like the Mass Effect games, and I like Dragon Age. Like, I know a lot of people are very unhappy about Dragon Age Inquisition. I think that is a very good game.
Well, I mean, you can like many different kinds of RPGs, and it's not that one is better or worse than the other, but I just feel like Divinity did scratch an itch that wasn't being attended to. That got weird. That was a weird metaphor. But you know what I mean?
Exactly, yeah.
It does something different.
Right.
And you don't necessarily have to abandon one for the other. I just think it's really refreshing that they made the choices that they did in a market that's, you could think, is potentially oversaturated with a modern action RPGs.
Right. And it's a risk that like a major studio probably wouldn't be willing to take.
Right.
Which is why it's like a big successful story for crowdfunding.
I think it just, the one great thing about Divinity for us is that it just suited the way we wanted to play the game that I mentioned earlier, like playing once per week for a few hours. So I think it sets up really well the multiplayer. It sets up really well for people who are like us, who are like in their late 20s, or some of us in our early 30s, who like still want to stay in touch and play games together. Who knows how old we might be? Scientists still aren't sure, but people who want to stay in touch and play games remotely, like something that is super action focused isn't as great for that as something like this, where it's a little more story driven, and all the turn based combat really gives you time to individually, think about what you're going to do. And I just think it's set up really well for that. So like it's been said multiple times, I think there's a big market for that style of game, for this style of game, and I really hope that more games like this come out.
Yeah, what one thing that this does that is a departure from Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights is the turn-based combat. And I am somebody who would have, like, there are plenty of turn-based games that I like. I really like Final Fantasy Tactics, but I would have pushed back on the idea of turn-based being an improvement over real-time with pause, which is like the classic CRPG combat system. But I actually love the turn-based combat in this game. I mean, the combat is great for a lot of reasons, but if I had the option to, if I could pick for Baldur's Gate 3 whether they had real-time with pause or turn-based, I would want the system from Divinity, which is what they are implementing. So
yeah,
I 100% agree. It's what goes a long way to make this feel almost like we're playing D&D, which is high praise.
Yeah, I agree. It feels weird to play like Neverwinter Nights, which we're playing now, which has that action system. Like, the turn-based combat just makes so much more sense in this kind of game, I think.
Well, it allowed us to work as a team and to sort of set up things for each other. So maybe Steven might teleport someone that was now within Daniel's range so he could spike whatever necromantic shit down the enemy's throat that we could, So it was a lot more of us working collaboratively rather than
a lot more like strategy.
Right.
And the combat is hard enough that it requires that. You
Yeah.
can't just bullshit your way through this game. You have to discuss what you're doing and work together.
Yeah, you can't just have a DPS and a tank and a healer and play the game in a very straightforward way. It will punish you pretty hard if you aren't thoughtful about things and actually utilize the systems. But that never feels like a bad thing, because it actually feels really satisfying to engage with most of the systems. So it actually it sort of forces you to play it in a more engaged way, and ultimately is more rewarding for that reason. There's not just an overpowered skill or approach to the game that you can just reliably take. Especially the movement, positioning is super, super important. We discovered pretty early on that the teleport skill would be the difference between an encounter being close to impossible and fairly manageable. Even just using teleport a couple of times to put an enemy in a key position, or put them in a spot where they can't hurt somebody. So all of that stuff just felt super satisfying to use. It made you feel smart for getting it and for using it, which I think is what you want a system to do.
Yeah, it really rewards you for like experimenting with it.
Mhm.
Like you said with the teleporting, like I could imagine playing this myself and not figuring that out till like halfway through, you know.
Right.
And, and like there's other stuff we learned, like we could like draw enemies away with like ranged attacks, and you know, like do sneak attack damage, and like it's stuff to give you like a leg up in battles.
Yeah.
That it doesn't feel like you're cheesing the game.
It's also the way the battlefields are organized and created is to use 3-dimensional space and to use different surfaces. So, you know, especially early on with oil surfaces, they're everywhere. And you've got to be, number one, aware of using those to your advantage to burn a bunch of enemies up, and number two, aware of not killing all your party members.
Right.
Like, for me as the caster, especially early when my skills are a little more limited, and it was a bunch of area of effect spells, I couldn't use my big damage stuff maybe 80% of the time because somebody's dumbass walked into some oil. And it was like, maybe not even close to the enemy, but it was connected via some route where if I hit this enemy, then it's going to just roast somebody on our team. So that definitely, like...
It turns out it made Steven a more conscientious and collaborative player. Who would have known?
Yes, I had to actually like pay attention to where everybody was, and a lot of times ended up just apologizing.
Right.
So, because I would a lot of times be, while it was somebody else's turn, I'm paying attention to what they're doing, but I'm also planning ahead for what I'm going to do. So that's one nice element about this turn-based combat is there's so much you can do on your turn, given 3-dimensional space, like where you want to move, where you want enemies to move, where you need them to move to, so that you can be most effective, and, you know, the area of effect of different skills and spells. I would spend most of your guys' turns, like, calculating who could, if I had to hit one of you, who could take the damage, and, like, would it be worthwhile to do this damage? Where, you know, can I group these enemies in a way that will be most effective? So it really felt like it's a thinking man's combat system, for sure, which I really appreciated.
Yeah,
and
sorry, go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to say that there's like an extra layer there too that you were getting at, where you just use the fireball even though your party member's standing in oil, because you know they can take it because they have the magic armor, which we hadn't brought up the armor yet. And so like sometimes that's the ideal move, is to just hit your party member because they can take it, and you can also kill, you know, an enemy at the same time.
But you know a healer's coming up next in the round, so if they need a buff, the healer can take care of it. And
yeah,
the turn order mattered a lot. I'm glad you mentioned the armor system, Andy. I liked it a lot. I thought it added like just enough complexity, but was like still easy to understand. Like there's no confusion about like, okay, either damages magic armor or damages physical armor, and like you need to strip one or the other for certain abilities to like secondary effects are so important in this game, and like crowd control abilities, that like so much of your strategizing is thinking like, okay, like who can we strip of magic armor so we can charm them, or like who can we strip of physical armor so we can knock them down so they don't take a turn. It's not just about doing large numbers of damage was almost never a consideration, right? Like it was all about either putting somebody in a position where they were no longer a threat physically, like using space, like Steven said, or like strategically doing magic or physical damage so that we could apply effects on people. And it wasn't just like, all right, we need to do 10,000 damage to this person.
Yeah, and
you had to like whittle them down first before you had to worry about dealing damage.
Right. And I think that the way the game's set up is really balanced between that physical armor and that magic armor, and those different the usefulness of spells to either make them unavailable in combat or physically make them unavailable, to where you didn't just need your fighter to hit for a shitload of damage, or your wizard to hit for a shitload of damage, where, you know, there were I'm sure a number of fights we went into where I maybe didn't cast any damaging spells. Like if we were going up against enemies who had relatively low physical armor but a bunch of magic armor, I would spend all of my time and energy focused on buffs and moving people around and just managing the battlefield, which is super rewarding in its own way, and you feel like you're an important part of the team in doing that. But I might not cast a damage spell for an entire encounter, if it's not going to be particularly useful, whereas you guys are all doing physical damage, and if I'm not contributing any physical, then all I'm going to do is I want to make sure I put you in the right place to be as effective as you can be.
Yeah, Sabile and Losa had a really great working relationship of, hey, can you pop me up on that
Right.
tower, please?
Yeah, whatever tall thing you needed to be on,
Yeah.
I would make sure that you got on that tall thing.
I mean, I hardly did any damage the whole game. I mean, really, like Fane had like 2 damage abilities. And then otherwise, he summoned and like buffed and healed, which I loved. Like I absolutely loved like the role I was able to play.
Yeah, that was a great character for you specifically.
Right.
And again, that's why I didn't mind the being able to change kind of your specs so frequently, because sometimes you might get into an encounter and realize like, oh, we're much more weighted toward physical damage. Like, we need someone who can do more magic damage. I need to take more magic damage spells. Or you might say, like, oh, I can do nothing if someone is up in my face. I need to get this wand that has a little bit better as far as, like, a 1v1 melee action. Or, I need to prepare this spell because I realize that teleportation is really important.
Or I'm the Red Prince and I keep getting blown away by anything magical, so maybe I want to take a little bit of magic armor.
So I wanted to mention, I think there are 2 other things that I would be upset if I didn't mention about the combat system. The first is like one of the most genius things about this system and why it works so well is it manages to realize turn-based without a grid map system, which is like I'm super, maybe the most impressive like single thing this game does is like the kind of like realistic spacing in space, but still having a turn-based system. I think that like a grid system would be way less fun and interesting than this. Would have been.
They do movement really well.
Yeah, and the other thing that makes you utilize the systems and makes using them rewarding is the difficulty in general and like the way the AI is like plays to win. Like the AI will, every single enemy will attack your weakest character if you give them a chance and kill them as soon as they can. Like there is not like a kind of player friendly like, oh, you can aggro the enemy if you're close to them and you're the tank. Like they will like walk through fire to kill your weakest character if that's the smartest thing for them to do. And I like at times that could make the battles frustrating in a way because they're really challenging. Like somebody's getting killed in the first turn of some of the fights, but it also like made it that much more rewarding because like you were actually going up against an opponent that was like playing to win, and it didn't feel like, all right, like I'm smarter than this computer and I can stack the odds in my favor in a way that this isn't that challenging.
I think it comes. Sorry, go ahead.
You can go ahead.
I was just gonna say it comes back to the like that D&D feel of your computer opponent feels like a real person. It feels like you're playing against a DM who knows who the weakest player is and how to fuck up your party, and so they're gonna do that. So it's kind of playing against a shitty, mean DM in combat sometimes.
Yeah, and a lot of the enemies can use a lot of the same abilities as you. Like it doesn't. It feels like you're on equal footing with the enemies a lot of the time, which adds a lot, I think.
Yeah, like
and there are abilities the enemies have that you can't access. There are several spells that are like void creature only spells. Like Void Glide is one that comes to mind. But I know there's several others that I would get hit by from an enemy and be like, how the fuck am I going to learn that spell? That was awesome. And never could. So it just, there are some like enemy specific spells and abilities, which I think is cool, rather than just giving them the same kind of generic skill set that your characters would have.
Yeah, they stack the deck against you sometimes, where a lot of other games do the opposite.
Yeah, but there are very frequently ways that you can even the playing field, which is not like in that the final battle of this game felt appropriately hard. I mean, we played it more times than any other fight in the game.
Couple sessions for sure.
And like one of the ways that we were able to finally beat it was like we got teleported to the like void realm, and there was that one little island And we were like, what if we just teleport like a couple of the melee guys over there? Like, are they going to be able to like leave it? And it turns out the answer was like, no, they can't. Which is like, that's part of the game design, right? Like, that is not like an exploit. That's like, sometimes you have to do things like that to even the playing field so that you have a chance, which I really like.
Yeah, it respects your intelligence.
One of my notes was that this game in combat, it always feels like there's something meaningful that you can do. Like, on your turn, I never have the turn, or rarely have the turn where it's like, okay, I'll just like attack this guy, and then I guess that's all I can do. It always felt like if I'm not doing more, it's my own fault for not seeing it. Then for the games, it's definitely not the game's fault for like giving me nothing I can do here and making this combat impossible. Like, no matter what situation we were in, it felt like there's a way out of this if we can figure it out. If I can figure out where to put my character or what to do. And so it also felt like every turn was super meaningful in combat, which I really appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you gain a big advantage from using your brain in a way that like not a lot of games deliver on.
Were there? Go ahead.
I was just gonna say another thing I think of as a pillar of the combat system that we mentioned but didn't really talk about is like the elemental like environment manipulation. I like how like that operates under like a logic and is like fairly intuitive. Like there would be some times where we couldn't see through smoke when we thought we should be able to, but for the most part it always felt like it worked the way you thought it would work. And I don't know, I just thought that was pretty successful.
Yeah, I think that like the instances where we couldn't see through smoke, it was less that I was frustrated with the combat being designed in a way like that smoke blocked your vision. It's more like, God damn it! Like if I could just see through this smoke, then I'd be able to do exactly the thing I want to do. But you just had to find a different way to make it work.
And it's something Janelle mentioned a couple minutes ago, but like the different surfaces were one of the key ways that this game let you like work with the other players in your party in ways that felt fun. Like you were like really working together. So like if we were fighting an enemy that had really low magic armor but really high physical armor, I could like have Losa like cast Fireball so that when I summon my incarnate guy, he's like fire imbued, so all his attacks do magic damage. Like that kind of interplay is also felt really satisfying, and it felt more like teamwork oriented in a way that it otherwise wouldn't have.
And you had to remember to put nails on your shoes so you wouldn't fall down on ice.
That's true. You had to put. I took a long time to put nails on my shoes for really no reason.
I sure did as well.
I always made sure there were nails in my shoes after watching the Red Prince fall down every combat.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of little like supplemental systems like that it can be easy to like just not even notice or forget about.
I feel like we didn't really get into the crafting system, which is super extensive in this game, which is something I usually don't get into in games anyway. So I'm not surprised that I didn't get into it. But, you know, for hoarders of things in their inventory like Janelle, it's kind of something maybe she could have or would have been more interested in is the crafting tables, because who knows what kind of crazy shit she could have made with all those things that she had.
I love crafting in games. I do.
I don't.
I know. But no, in Skyrim, like my arcana, blacksmithing, everything was always like off the charts because I was constantly making armor and then just immediately crawling my way to sell it because my inventory was now so full. Like there's just something really satisfying about it to me. Animal Crossing.
Unlike Chad,
the DIY.
You didn't like crafting in Skyrim so that you could name your items things like the exquisite scrote smasher.
Exactly. I mean, I did.
So, given that you like crafting so much, I felt like you didn't really do any in Divinity, right?
Well, I was going to bring that up. It just... I don't want to shit on my party members who will remain unnamed. I don't. Scientists still aren't sure who I played the game with. But it is really hard in a multiplayer environment like that to necessarily do those kinds of things when other people are not as motivated.
You feel like you're holding everyone else up.
Exactly. Yeah. I usually like playing solo games for that reason, where I can just log a dumb amount of hours into crafting shit or like doing the weird minutia things. Like Daniel can remake his character 27 times in a game and no one will judge him for that. I can craft all day. So I think that is something that was maybe lost to me a little bit, but that's okay. I mean, yeah, we could have had some dope shit, but
Yeah, I felt like there was so much stuff in the game. Like, it felt like we were always finding new armor and weapons, especially with Steven looting everything.
That was going to be my next thing
existence.
to bring up, actually.
Yeah, it never really felt like we needed to. Like, there was never a point where I was like, oh, I should craft some better armor. Because I was always getting better armor,
I was not. I got nothing. My armor was so bad. I died all the time because I was not as adequately protected as y'all. So maybe if I had gotten to craft, it would have been better for me.
So speaking of the loot, how did you guys feel about the loot system in this game compared to, like, there are systems where we would each individually, like, see different loot in all scenarios and, like, all have an equal access to it. In Divinity, it's not that way. Like, whoever grabs it, grabbed it, and it was almost always me. But which I will also, I want to defend myself a little bit on my looting, in that I never got quest loot. Thane always got quest loot, and so did Sabille. They got lots of loot from every quest we ever did because they would always talk to the NPCs to, like, initiate
Well, I was the most
quests.
persuasive.
And whose fault is it that you don't want to sit and talk to people?
I didn't want to... Hey, we're all role-playing our characters in our own ways, and my way was to not talk to people and to let you guys do all that. You guys were... Thane was the face. He put on a face.
Thane was the face with his skull face.
I didn't have a face ripper.
Yeah, he ripped the face. Yes, he did. To start the game, he had to rip a face. So Thane ripped a face and became the face, and was the most persuasive, so of course he's going to talk to everybody. And I had my telekinesis ability, which allowed me to loot things from afar, which was
equally
moderately... It was, there were definitely scenarios in which that ability was useful, and so I'm glad I had it. It was most useful in looting things before anybody else could get to them, though. So I did a lot of looting. So as the characters who didn't benefit from that system as much, how did you guys feel about that system? Because usually, like, typically, if I found something that I thought you could use, I would tell you about it, and not just, like, hoard it and sell it. Like, every time I got an arrow of some kind, I sent it to Sabille. Every time I got a bomb of some kind, I sent it to the Red Prince, because he was going to use them in combat, especially the glitter bombs.
Yeah, I do think I'm good with I'm good with the system the way it was. I think I can't think, like, there just aren't that many co-op RPGs like this to compare it to. But, like, in, like, World of Warcraft, for example, the reason you have your own this wasn't always true. Like, the reason you loot bodies, like, independently of other players that can also loot those bodies is, like, you're playing with strangers that don't have any incentive to cooperate with you. So, like, it's like a zero-sum game. This game is, like, you have every incentive to, like, make sure that everyone is equipped adequately, because otherwise they're not going to pull their weight in the encounters, and, like, it's going to be bad for you. So I'm fine with the system the way it was, and I thought, despite your rampant greed, you did dole out the stuff you picked up mostly equitably. Although you always had a shield that had, like, 3,000 armor more than whatever shield I had.
Well, we're both shield users, so I have to keep the best shield for myself, and if I have another one that's decent, I'll give it to you. I also, sidebar on that real quick, I do want to continue with that question, but sidebar, I did appreciate that this game allowed the caster to put on some fucking armor thanks to shields. Like, if it wasn't for my shield, I would have been so squishy, it would have been embarrassing, and I would have probably been killed in most encounters. But the fact that I'm allowed to use a shield let me put on a little bit of armor to where I felt durable. Like, even though I was the caster, I was able to take a hit and not just get one-shotted by a boss battle. So thank you, Larian, for that.
I was going to say also in Steven's defense on the looting thing, I think they want you to do that. Like, I do think there's an element of competition. Like, it almost kind of feels like Gauntlet a little bit, where they want you to compete for the loot. And we never really engaged in this, but like you can sabotage the other players if you want. Like you can attack your party members, you can stab them in the back, you can poison them, you can do like whatever and fuck with each other if you want to play it that way. Mm-hmm. So I think it's fun that that's in there, that like you can compete for the loot in the dungeon, even though I'm not super competitive and probably got the least loot of anybody. I enjoyed that it was in there.
Also, it helps to have that one character going for all the loot greedily, because think of all the stuff we would have missed if I didn't grab it.
No, that's
like
true.
you all walk past a lot of stuff that I just like. I was holding down shift the entire time, which highlights the stuff around you. Like, that's how I played the game, was highlighting the loot. And so think about all the good shit you would have missed out on.
It's alright. Andy is right that those subsystems are important, because the way that we kept your looting in check was usually would have Janelle pick your pockets before you joined every session to make sure that you weren't hoarding anything.
And I wasn't hoarding
No, you weren't. No, you weren't. That's how we kept you honest, though. Just a peek behind the curtain we haven't discussed before.
I did not know that you didn't trust me that much that you're checking my inventory.
Well, I just
but that is true. You don't even have to pickpocket. You can just look at other people's inventories. And that's where I would look at Janelle's inventory and get really frustrated that she had so much shit in her inventory that she didn't use in fights. Like, if we had a tough boss battle, it's like, oh, you had 40 charm arrows just sitting there that you didn't even
But then
touch.
At the end of the game,
it was useful.
That's a classic RPG thing.
It's like,
save all the consumable items to the end. I do that shit too.
Were there any combat encounters that were especially memorable for you guys?
Go
ahead. I feel like we might have the same one. My favorite, dungeon in the game by far.
Oh, this was not in a dungeon.
Okay.
This was in Act 2 in the overworld. There was an encounter with probably 50 oil blobs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Up until the end, that was the hardest fight in the game. Yeah, that was super hard. I thought. That was a huge difficulty spike for us. We probably spent 2.5 sessions on
that's 4 hours of real life time trying to fight those blobs.
Yeah. So I thought that one was really interesting, and there was the NPC involved that you could free to help you.
Yeah.
Partway through, that one really stands out in my mind.
I think another reason that one stands out a lot is because for me, it kind of changed the way I play the game. Honestly, it really informed me going forward that I could not load up on one element and be effective.
Sure.
We teleported shit all over the place in that fight.
I felt really ineffective in a lot of ways in that fight because of the oil everywhere. I couldn't use any fire, because if I used any fire spells, then everybody is getting fucked up everywhere, which is obviously the way they designed it. They wanted it that way. And so I think that really informed my mixing of skills, which I ended up really preferring to specializing one specific area.
That was also the first encounter that taught us to use the bless mechanic in a meaningful way.
The blessed fire.
Yeah, because the fire kept getting cursed and was a huge problem. And so up until that point, there hadn't been that much incentive to engage with that. But afterwards, I felt like I learned from that encounter. So actually think about whether you can use the bless skill in a useful way.
Yeah, another reason that encounter is, I think, important narratively is somebody said about the NPC that you could involve in a positive way. I think that's a big thing Divinity does is with its NPCs, you can make the choice to let them live or die a lot of the time. Yeah. And we weren't going around just doing a bunch of murders and cheesing the game. We were trying to really roleplay this world, and we had a lot of those choices. Do we let this guy live or not? And
to be fair, we did do a lot of murder.
We did do a lot of murder, you're right. But as far as
way less than we could have.
Yeah, extra unnecessary murder. Because, if I'm sitting there and one of the things I looked up after or while we were playing the game was before we left Act 1, I Googled, is there anything I'm missing in Fort Joy? And because I didn't want to leave anything behind, which I kind of hit on before, I want to make sure I got every meaningful side quest. And so I just looked it up online, is there something I missed? 99% of the response to that was, go back and murder everybody now that you're super high level.
Right.
Everybody was recommending on Reddit and the Steam forums, just go back and destroy everything and pick everybody's pockets because you're way too high level for them to do anything about it. And so you'll leave Act 1 with a shitload of loot and 2 levels higher than you would have normally. It's like, well, that's not fun.
Yeah.
So we didn't do that. There was way more murder on the table we could have done. But anyway, I think that for that blob fight, it definitely gave you that, like, here's a man about to be hung. What do you want to do about it?
Yeah.
And is he gonna be useful to you or not? So
I like that it gives the play, like, there is so much freedom of choice in this game, and I like that. That's one thing I really like about it. Like, it trusts you to play it in a way, or like create an experience that you're gonna enjoy, and doesn't like hamstring like the options you have to try to like funnel you into having a certain experience. So if you want to go into town and kill everybody to take all of their stuff, like, that's on the table if you want to do it. If that's not like going to contribute to you enjoying the game, which it wouldn't for us, you don't have to do that.
all right, Dana, what was your big fight that stood out for you?
Oh yeah. Well, I think you two are going to agree, and I know that unfortunately, and like, this is the only black mark on an otherwise great encounter and maybe my favorite session, is Janelle didn't enjoy it, is the one where it split the party up.
Yeah.
Oh.
That was awesome. Like, total curveball. Everyone was separated and like had to figure out how to reconnect with everyone else in their own way. And it was like, it was just hard enough, just long enough. Like, I just loved that dungeon. It was probably my favorite combat encounter in the game. Unfortunately, Janelle died like very early in that, and because we were separated, she just like didn't get to play for most of the session.
Yeah, someone had to just come and find me.
Yeah.
Dead in a corner in a cave.
If you had got to have the experience the rest of us did, I think that would have been like close to like a perfect like little slice of the game. It was so good.
It was just, it's hard because I played very much as kind of the assist character. I didn't necessarily have like huge DPS. I didn't have great defensive anything. My armor was pretty weak. So I really did rely a lot on you guys to sort of either back me up or give me openings, move me around. I did have great movement as well. Not that helps when you're surrounded by a bunch of fucking spiders in a cave.
Well, I also think you got dropped into the deadliest part of the cave.
Yeah, you were at the end part of the cave, like the final room.
Yeah.
So that was a tough spot to be in. I think that dungeon design, I think for when it separated us out individually, it definitely helped for me, and I think for me and Fane, we probably had the easiest time for our characters because I had the ability to escape combat if I needed to through teleporting or through moving enemies around or through a variety. I had a lot of avenues open to me as the wizard character, and I think Fane had a lot of options open as the summoner to like let the incarnate do all the dirty work for him while he stayed safe.
Yeah.
And so I think for like any other character, for Sabia was the rogue or for the Red Prince as the fighter, like they had a harder time of that dungeon being separated. So I think it helped that I found the Red Prince pretty early often. Like once you hack down like one door, we ended up kind of linking up early, and that helped to take it on together. Where I think we fought like one Voidwoken monster for a long time.
Yeah, you did.
Like it was a long time of me, I would switch places with you, go heal, come back. Yep. Switch places with you, go heal, come back. Teleport him, go heal, come back. Like I came in and out of that one fight with that Voidwoken at least 4 or 5 times.
But I love
probably
that,
more.
Like that.
But yeah, it's like, how can the two of us survive this? That goes back to my earlier point of like, it always feels like there's something you can do in this game to get out of a fight or to win a fight. So even given it was a way harder monster than I could take on by myself, but just having the Red Prince there, so where we could like swap places and each of us take turns go and heal, like it made that impossible encounter possible to beat. We just had to be like smart and patient.
I just look like
I
just look like the angry Pingu meme the whole time. Pingu, where he's got the towel on his head and he's got his arms folded and he's like,
yeah,
claymation penguin. That was me. I'm glad you all had a good time though.
Now, it's a great example of like taking the safety net away. You see this in games from time to time where they just like take your crutch and they get rid of it. Like you can't rely on the other players to help you, and you have to like be like, oh shit, and reevaluate what you're doing. Like, you know, it tests your
Testes?
your it tests your
Is this
testes.
a family podcast?
Oh, sorry. Bleep that out.
Like your adaptability, like your ability to react to the situation.
Yeah, I think we were
in an interesting way.
I think we were a little surprised. At least I was a little surprised that we didn't just die immediately. Like, I know Sabille died immediately, but the rest of us didn't. And it almost felt going into that dungeon like it was one of those game moments where you're supposed to lose. Like, you're supposed to all die. You're all gonna die, and then the god will come and tell you some shit.
I think we even discussed that at the time. We thought, like, are we supposed to get killed here?
But then we didn't, and we found a way to live through that.
Right.
And it was all in one session too. I think maybe I think we went into that dungeon at the end of a session, then started a new one there. But it wasn't like we didn't go weeks in real life of not sure if we were supposed to be there or not. Like, it fit in a 2-hour or 3-hour span, and we were able to like kind of really slowly work our way through with a lot of careful thought and strategy in every encounter. And so, yeah, I agree with Daniel. That's another possibly my favorite dungeons in that game.
I liked killing my former slave owner, especially because I'm like, I'm gonna fucking talk to this guy, and I think he's my slave owner, and I think we're gonna have to kill him. And y'all were like, oh, fine, I guess we'll stop and talk to this guy. And lo and behold, I was correct. It was very, and that was also part of the Red Princess storyline.
Yeah, he was related to me as well. He was like my rival for the throne or whatever.
Yeah, I just that probably speaks more to a deep-seated personal issue of why y'all wouldn't let me have time to craft or do my own shit. But no, I mean, it really was funny where I'm like, guys, I really think we need to like go talk to this guy. And y'all are like, fine, I guess go ahead. And then lo and behold, it was this whole combat with the like the shadow assassins, and I don't know. That was fun. It was nice to have a resolution for the storyline, and that's the one that I guess stands out to me. And also any that dropped flesh loot was great. Because it could be like, he died in agony and on fire. And I'm like, true, that did just happen, didn't it?
Yeah, I also really love that mechanic. And I would frequently bring body parts to Janelle for her to eat.
We would all get excited when found body parts for Janelle.
Because Dan and I originally like tried the game out co-op by ourselves for a little bit before we all played together, and I played an elf that could do that and was super into it.
I will say that one combat that I'm glad they let us have it, but I'm a little frustrated with how it was set up. And you could probably guess which one I'm going to say. I can see it on Daniel's face right now. Yes. It's the one where, you know, there's the tension throughout the whole game of only one of you can become divine. You're eventually going to have to betray. Like, I was preparing the entire time to betray you guys in some fashion.
We know.
So, like, you're always ready for that, like, yeah. You're always having to be ready for that, like, only one of you can come out of this. You're going to have to fight each other at some point. It's kind of something the game gives you. And then there is a point in the game where you do get to fight each other. And it doesn't feel like it's for deadly stakes. It doesn't feel like it's the end of the game. Like, it's early enough in the game that it feels reasonable that, like, oh, you're just going to all be out of this at the end anyway. So, like, there aren't super high stakes to it. But the way that it was set up, I didn't appreciate, because I didn't feel like it was a fair test against each other.
It deflates the tension, too. Like, it gets the fight out of the way too early, instead of letting you, like, think about it more.
I thought it was fine.
Let it stew.
Obviously.
Well, you would.
Yeah. Another one I wanted to bring up, because it still kind of pokes at the back of my mind, because we never went back to it, is when we were on the volcanic island area, and Steven got that stone that took us to, like, the whatever fuckery dimension.
It was kind of the fuckery dimension.
The dimension of fuckery was...
It was the romper room fuckery dimension.
Unfortunately. I wish yeah, whatever happened where we realized we couldn't get back there once it was like a one-time, or it wasn't one-time use, it had to be used in that act.
Yeah, on the island, yeah. So I wish we would have gone back to that and seen what happened.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you could watch a YouTube video.
Yeah, but that's not the same.
True.
Well, are we nearing final thoughts time?
I think so. There's just one other thing I have in my notes I thought would be maybe interesting to talk about. But I feel like we talked a little bit on the first half about this kind of being like a double A game, you know, like the game looks great, but it's not quite, you know, like triple A level, you know, like a The Witcher 3 or anything close to that. But it looks great, and I think the fact that it's like mostly kind of isometric, like you can zoom the camera in a lot, but they don't have to worry as much about the visual fidelity, and I think that allows them to just pack the world with a bunch of detail and like make it really dense in a way that you can't with like a really big like AAA level game. And it's something that even Baldur's Gate and things like that took advantage of back in the day, is like the more simple pulled back visual style just allows them to like really pack the game full of the stuff that you want in an RPG.
Yeah, this game I think it looks incredibly good. I mean, it's like...
Yeah, it looks great.
The art design is great, and like the detail is terrific. The environments are really beautiful. Like, when I first started playing it, I couldn't believe this wasn't like a AAA, like, big studio title. It looks fantastic.
I assumed that it was a big studio title. I didn't know any of this about Kickstarter until we started this podcast today. Like, I had no idea that this wasn't a huge game.
Yeah, the water looked especially nice, I thought. Like, I like that this game started, like, on a beach. I thought, like, the visuals of that I thought were really
Any
great.
of the environments that, like, had a lot of wood in them, I thought looked great. Like, the ship looked terrific, I thought. I mean, maybe I just like wooden things.
You do. But...
Yeah, you do like wooden things, and I like anything that starts on a beach, so, you know.
But I just wanted to throw that out there. Like, more games of this kind of, like, level, like, the more, like, mid-tier, high-quality products. I think we need more of that.
Yeah, another game that's kind of like that is Grim Dawn. Like, I don't think any of you guys have played, but it's also, like, it's like a more Diablo-like action RPG, but it also, like, it's kind of a double A game, and also looks terrific. At least its environments look terrific, like, for the same reason. So I think that there's a lot of, like, I think there's a lesson there for, like, making smart use of the resources you have, and, like, your design decisions can help make the game look really good, even if you don't have, like, the biggest budget in the world.
Do we want to touch on the ending? Because that, for me, is kind of where the bag got fumbled a teeny bit. Just as far.
Yeah.
I mean, there are many potential endings, and just for a game that felt like, with the choices that you had and the choices that were made, I didn't like that there was a quote-unquote, like, secret right ending, where if you chose to purge the world of Source and close the veil, you knew everyone was going to be protected from the Voidwoken. However, you knew that you were going to be losing your powers, and everybody else was going to lose their powers. But it is, of course, the morally right thing to do. Yeah. And then you find out, if you choose that ending, that somehow Malady is able to preserve your source powers and your abilities. It's like, well, that hamstrings the importance of making that choice. That if you wanted to make that morally correct choice, there should be that price to pay. You shouldn't get the happy glowy ending reward just because you chose to do the right thing.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. It's my least favorite trend in video game, like, morality systems or, like, moral choices, where you are set up as having an ostensibly, like, difficult moral choice to make, but if you make the, like, quote-unquote right decision, then, like, everything turns out fine. I love the Mass Effect games, but, like, this is their greatest sin for me. This is their greatest original
Divinity
sin.
Yeah.
This is their original sin for me, because it's like, you're set up as having, like, you know, do you sterilize the Krogans and, like, prevent, because they're, like, a super aggressive race that, like, spread everywhere? Or like, do you say like that's not like right and it's functionally genocide and like I'll live with the consequences. But then if you pick like the not genocide option, it turns out everything's fine. Like you need to get the downside of like making the morally right decision, because then it feels meaningful. And I really don't like it when a game like just strips away all of the negative consequences of doing the right thing, because then it's not really a choice.
Well, yeah, and then so obvious three of us made the decision not to ascend to divinehood, whereas
who made
surprise,
the other
surprise, it was Steven and Losa. And so yeah, the choice of how to kind of resolve the ending and deal with the Void Woken and the hole in the veil and where's the source going and blah 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 did fall in the end to one player. I don't know whether we would have had to have a 1v1 to resolve who got to make the final choice or what that was, but you made the choice that I think we all, as role-playing our characters, would have wanted, which is that everyone gets source now, everyone becomes sorcerers, and that did have the side effect of momentary peace followed by power struggle and eventual war and sort of a collapse of society, which that makes sense. That was the choice we made, and it had the appropriate repercussions. The other endings were that we could have allowed the God King and the Eternals to come back, meaning that we would all be feigned slaves.
Which is not the one that I picked, so.
Yeah. And the other one, which was... I feel like there was one more. That someone become divine, which no one actually ascended because everyone ended up with the source.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, it felt like with all the endings there were appropriate sort of consequences for the decision, except for, then I found out that there was the right choice, that everyone sails away into a future where they're the only ones with source, and yet there are no consequences for that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't think I can really add anything. The game was more about the journey for me anyway, so it didn't really hit as hard that the ending wasn't stellar.
It's about the journey, not the destination.
That's the way the Red Prince lives, man.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree that it was like, it wouldn't have mattered at the end, honestly. Like, I got so much out of playing the game at that point that whatever bullshit they wanted to make up to like how it resolves wasn't gonna hit me that hard either way. I didn't know there was a quote-unquote right ending because I didn't look up anything beyond, like, I was given the choice. And I think my only frustration with the end was that I felt like it was the only point it got to where I couldn't really role play my choice the way I wanted to, because I didn't want to screw over anybody else. I got to the point of like, if you wanted to ascend to godhood or not, and I said yes, and nobody else did. And then it was like, okay, now you get to decide what happens to everyone. I was like, well, shit. If I was playing this solo, and then maybe I would have made a different choice. But as part of like a group, you do feel like penned into, I have to make the morally right choice, even given that my character has acted immorally in so many other ways, that it would just be unfair to everyone else involved if I didn't act to the expected like moral outcome here. So I agree that I don't love that is like a thing in games, like Dan was saying, and that you're kind of forced to make that choice, or if you get rewarded for making the moral choice, because in real life, if you make the moral choice, you're probably not going to get rewarded for it.
Yeah.
So I would love to see a little bit more realistic take on that.
Well, do we have divine thoughts? God-woken thoughts?
Yes, God-woke thoughts.
God-woke thoughts? I'll go first. This game has flaws. We talked about the story doesn't necessarily like hang together start to finish. I agree the ending was like a little bit underwhelming. One thing we didn't mention is the quest log is terrible in this game. Like, it was, especially the way we played it, going week to week, it gave you almost no information about what had already happened or what you were supposed to do next. One of like the few design problems in this game. But this is like one of my favorite games ever at this point, probably. It's just so good. Like, the systems are super fun. Like, I always look forward to combat in the game because it's just, like, so engaging, active, cooperative. And like I said, I don't think I've ever been looking forward more to a game than Baldur's Gate 3. Partly because I loved this game, and I didn't even really get that sucked into, like, the world or the story. They were competently made and, like, good in their own way. Like, I don't want to be harsh on them, but, like, that's not what I loved about this game. So, like, the fact that they're now doing a game, like, set in the Forgotten Realms and, like, using more Dungeons and Dragons backdrop is something that, like, I just, like, could not be more excited about. So,
I mean, I guess I'll go second then on what Dan was saying. I like completely agree that it's one of my favorite games that I've played, and that it was something I look forward to so much every week. If something came up where I couldn't play Divinity on Wednesday night, I was always disappointed in it. Like, it was, I love a game like that where you aren't, when I'm at work on a Tuesday thinking about what I'm going to do when we get back on Divinity the next day, like, that's a sign of a really good game. Like, that's happened to me a lot of times with other games too. But, you know, when you're thinking about the game when you're not playing it, I think is a big sign of, like, a really high quality game experience, and that you look forward to getting back to it every week and getting on and what you're going to do. And so, yeah, like, the world and its lore, I couldn't tell you much about the world of Rivellon, or, you know, its histories and all its different factions and things. Like, I got some of the information about the elves that I can remember, and it was an important part of the game, obviously, its setting, but it was more the mechanics of the game that I really loved, and the combat systems, the multiplayer system, the way the game worked, that really made it special. It's a really good experience for me playing in a special game, and again, makes me look forward to Baldur's Gate 3 so much, in the same way that Dan was talking about. It was super disappointing for me to hear about the Divinity Original Sin 3, or Divinity Original, like, the next sequel in the Divinity universe is not going to be multiplayer. It was going to be some kind of, like,
it's like a strategy game,
we talked about it briefly. Yeah, it's like a RTS style, which I like an RTS, but it's like, to hear that while we were playing Divinity, I heard about the sequel upcoming, and then found out it wasn't going to be a multiplayer game like this, RPG like this one was, and I was super disappointing to leave that behind. And it's like, it was a game that I did not look forward to ending. I didn't want to get to the end and finish it and be done with it. And it's super replayable, obviously, but for our purposes, I'm sure I probably won't be going back to replay it, but it was definitely one that I didn't look forward to finishing and being done with. And the fact that we have Baldur's Gate 3 to look forward to, as, like, it's not Divinity Original Sin 3, but it ostensibly, or for all my purposes, it kind of is. So yeah, I love the game. It's everything that I want in an RPG, the multiplayer RPG like this. So, all thumbs up from me.
I guess, piggybacking, I really liked that it was something that we could do together, and it felt collaborative, and it felt that we were all contributing, and we could all get kind of personal gratification out of it, but it was kind of a way of bringing people together, and I'm sure that it would be a fulfilling game to play solo as well. But I do think that it is best when shared with others. And so, yeah, it definitely is a good game to play, particularly in the present climate where you might be a little bit more remote from loved ones and other people that you might be used to spending time with. Something to look forward to as far as exploring a world together with other people. Bit of an escape, no? So I guess that's my big takeaway, was it was a really great game to experience with other people, even if they weren't super into letting you have time to craft. That's all I have to say about that.
I'll piggyback off of what Janelle was saying. This game, I think, is less to my tastes than either Daniel or Steven, like specifically, but I did really like this game mechanically and everything, but like I did really look forward to the social interaction. Like I really liked the co-op. I liked how seamless it was. Like it just works. Dan and Janelle could play split screen, and then we could also join, and it was never an issue, barring some internet troubles at the start, or computer troubles with Steven.
Or Daniel's computer troubles eventually.
That's true. Or that too. But yeah, and I love that this had controller support. I didn't bring that up. I tried both options and actually liked the controller better, which, was crazy given that it's a CRPG. So that was great. It's great overall. Like, especially as like a co-op game. I remember there was a summer where Dan and I tried to find a game to play together, and we couldn't find one. And years later, like we started playing this, and this is like an experience we kind of always been looking for. Like for years.
We played
and,
Fable
like,
3, but that's barely a video game.
Yeah, yeah. Zing, a well-deserved zing.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
but yeah, the game's great, and all the way through, it's jam-packed. It's high quality. I haven't played a game that's like this all around great in a long time. And I just really enjoyed my time with it. And it was enhanced because it was time also spent with friends.
Yeah!
But with that said, thank you for listening to NOCLIP this week.
What are we talking about next time?
Next time, we're going to be talking about Halo Combat Evolved. And until next time, if you'd like to get a hold of us, all of our contact information is on our website, noclippodcast.com. You can also find us on Twitter at noclippodcast. And if you're feeling like it, feel free to join our Discord server. You can also find the link to that on our website. And as always, make sure you yield to none in the comment section, and remember to smash that like button. I don't know what we're talking about next time, so I'm going to add it in later.
Next time, we'll be talking about Time Splitters Future Perfect.
Time Splitters. Hell yeah. I better be invited to that one.
Next time we're talking about Dragon Age Origins.
In the future.
Future Perfect?
Yeah, yes. Dragon Age Origins Future Perfect.
In the Future Perfect.
Future Perfect.